Hey, so my name's Nick. In this kind of vlog video, I'm going to be explaining how it is that I created this final part of the track and the most crescendo, like explosive part of the video. This whole trailer has been split into certain genre styles, so this beginning bit being more kind of like typical sort of cinematic stuff, going into sort of tribal drums and things like that, and then it has a little bit of an EDM thing here. But this final bit is meant to be the bit that hits the listener the most, and I wanted this final bit to be that bit because this is the last bit that people who would be watching this trailer would see, and you want them to have a good impression of it. So with most of this, with this entire video, pretty much, it's just being created through happy accidents, and this last bit here is not an exception at all. So you see how I've called this a rock bit. Pretty much what happened was I was playing around with the original MIDI of the chords, the main chords of the song, and I put these into Contact and then used a default violin from the default pack, and I set the, here you go, here's a string ensemble, and I set the chord to a fifth. So pretty much what this does is it's going to play every single note and then the fifth of that note in the MIDI. So you can see here, if I play this note here, so you can see here, if I play this note here, there's actually, you can hear two notes being played. It's the actual F itself, and then it's the fifth, the one that's 5 semitones higher. And by just accidentally doing that when I was just fiddling around with certain, with that control in the actual Contact itself, I unintentionally made a chord progression that was just had this like recurring note in it, which I thought just sounded really great to the ears. So this is how it sounds. So I pretty much use this as a way of using my I pretty much use this as like a second chord progression. It's in the same key as the beginning bits here, but that inclusion of that fifth note on each of the notes was a happy accident, and it just sparked an immediate idea for this kind of bit here, for this final bit here, sorry. So what I originally did is I set this up with this MIDI playing out for those fifth notes and certain other instruments, and just sort of layered them up. I wanted to make this bit sound super thick when it was building up, like all sorts of instruments. So you can see here I've got this Contact, obviously the main strings itself. I've also got this. This is the saw wave that's been low pass saw wave, which is similar to the one being played at the beginning. It sounds a bit like this. And you can see that this opens up as it approaches that crescendo part of the track. I also got a double bass from Contact to play a different bass line than previously. So you can see the notes for the bass here is different from this double bass here, and it's because I did want to sort of put the bass complemented this MIDI here in a way that made it sound rather than kind of action based, more kind of curious in a way. So yeah, so that's one of the layers. If we keep going up, you can see I can't remember what this is, I believe another saw layer. So for this building bit, so you can see this is the build. At the time that I was creating this, I was listening to a lot of that band Daughters, and I got super into their kind of like extremely over the top kind of like production style on their drums. So I decided to just try and experiment with that. So I got some typical sounding sort of like recorded drums. It was kind of annoying because I would have, ideally if I had enough time, I would have recorded this, but unfortunately I was just only able to use samples. And I got the normal kick drum, didn't do much to it. Sounds a little bit compressed and distorted though. And then I got the snare and just have completely ripped it to shreds with like just over the top saturation. When usually this is a snare that you would hear on a drum kit, and it just sounds like that. And I don't know what that it's called. I think it's like something that happens to do with this hard curve kind of style of saturation. when it clips so hard, it sort of pops around and kind of cuts off slightly, and I really like that because it proper emphasizes how ridiculously over the top the snare is, and it almost sounds a little bit more stereo because because of how much it's clipping, it kind of turns itself down in certain parts of the stereo field. It's really weird, but it's a really cool effect because I really did want to proper smash these drums to pieces to have this part of it just go insane. This part of it of the trailer to just go insane, and I feel like a recurring theme about this trailer, and because of it being a futuristic trailer, is I wanted to do kind of experimental, unorthodox things like this. I believe, yeah, this is a crash, just a normal, typical recorded crash. I've tried my best to make it so that these drum, even though it is MIDI, I've tried to make it so that this is the kind of drum beat that a performer would be able to perform. Because I originally had plans to have this recorded, and two, because I don't really want it to be, I don't want it people thinking that it's an electronic kit. Obviously, it's just ridiculously over the top, but I want it to still sound like someone has played this. And this is the best way of doing it, because you obviously don't want to have all sorts of different cymbals playing, because no one has like 5 arms to do that. So in addition to this, in typical kind of like, because I was listening to Daughters a lot, I wanted to get a guitar playing some power chords over this, excuse me, being laid with the synth area to give this proper like experimental kind of rock EDM kind of thing. So I asked my friend Dario to play some chords over. I originally started with this. This is a contact instrument of a rock guitar, and it sounds meh, but it's not meant to sound good. It was just a thing that I could show to the performer so that they would know what to play. But once you get someone else to actually perform it, a real guitar sounds much better. Excuse me, I think it's this one. And we also got a second layer. This is meant to be sort of like the mids kind of guitar. It's not the main guitar that kind of stands out in the mix, but it's the guitar that kind of supports this, the main guitar. And it's a little bit less distorted, but more kind of clean. So you can see in unison. The higher amount of like reverb and processing on this one here gives it the stereo-ness of that I kind of desired, but this keeps it kind of consistent because it's the supporting one. It's kind of difficult to explain this. So yeah, so I've got these two playing above a few other synths. These synths have been fully opened up, so rather than during this building section having like low pass filters that have slowly opened up and things like that, on this crescendo bit when the guitars come in, that's when they're fully open, so you have all that high end released energy to add excitement to it. So here's one of the synths. This is this is the string in addition being played, because just more layers makes it sound a lot more full and exciting. I've got a few more. This is I believe a sine wave. I also opted, I have this double bass for the build, but I opted for a sine wave because it's a lot easier to control with like side chaining and things like that. And because it's a sine wave, it's dead mono. A double bass, I can force it into mono, but at that point you may as well just be using a sine wave because it's gonna sound like it's no longer gonna sound like a double bass. So yeah, I've got that just as like the main bass to add the proper girth to it. More sort of layers here. And then I add obviously the guitars. So that's that really. You can see that I've got this whole rock bit section here going into a sidechain. The sidechain being the main kick drum for the over the top drums here. And it just makes space for that kick drum because this isn't a particularly You don't want to make mud by just having the kick drum on there. And then the final bit, which is the bit that I think adds, is the cream on top, and it's these vocal chops here. So I'm going to play these individually. This is how that sounds. So what these vocal chops are is I took a acapella that was just a random acapella that I happened to have on my computer, and it was of harmony, and like nothing that is like actually saying any words. And I took those and then I flattened them, add a bit of a fade out here. If I go into this mode, see there's a bit of fade out. There's more so in the original unflattened version, but I did that and then kind of pitch shifted it to key and added a bunch of reverb, a little bit of distortion just to make it sound a little bit less dull, and EQing, and obviously also sending this to the sidechain. One thing that I do to vocals, which I just love to do because it just adds, it's kind of like distortion where it's making harmonics, but it doesn't sound like kind of distortion. It just sounds like a layer. Is that I would format shift it very like a pitch higher. It's almost like you got the same thing and then layered one of them higher and then kind of turn that one down a little bit. It's kind of weird. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it adds a just certain level of kind of thickness to the overall sound that just sounds really kind of watery because obviously it's a kind of it's a vocoder, but for this kind of sound I think it's brilliant. So yeah, there's that. I've also got this vocal drone. This was just a random vocal drone that I made a while back. I created this by getting part of a vocal, putting a bit of reverb on it, and then freezing that reverb, and then flattening that. I do this a lot, and you get left with just this drone that's just playing this harmonic. Sounds a bit like that. This one's been pitch shifted a little bit here. And this just acted as like a background element, and it kind of works in the same way that all these other layers up here work, where it's just adding, it's a support, because it's supporting all of these layers here and just making it sound even more full. And I really did want to make this bit sound emphasized and just ridiculous. You can also see here, I have this, this isn't really entirely relevant. This is more of a sound effect kind of thing, but I'll mention it anyway. And I think it's really quite interesting because I didn't actually intend to do this originally, but you can see here, if I play this music bit, so the score itself, the original plan was to have that punch end dead on the bar here, but I couldn't find a way of like really stretching out because obviously I didn't want to alter the video because that would be kind of cheating, I feel like, and it would be really difficult to find the perfect tempo so that it intentionally does that. But the fact that I decided to keep it like this because the fact that it ends so suddenly like that, I feel like that just adds a lot more to kind of like it being unsettling, because it is kind of a unsettling part of the scene because it's literally violence right here. But that, it was an unintentional decision to begin with, but sorry, it was an unintentional thing to do to begin with, but I decided to keep it in because I actually think that it does add a fair amount to the whole unsettledness of it. I've also got this bit here. This bit here is the same recording of a guitar here, but it's being modulated here on this amplitude here. So this kind of joins in with the building thing to kind of like introduce that guitar so that when the guitar's coming in, it doesn't sound so sudden. I do this a lot on transitional stuff.
They stole it.
How many were there before me?
She was supposed to have a clean brain. I order you to terminate it.
They created me, but they cannot control me.
Sweet.